Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Behind the Cape. I'm data superhero Keith Belanger, and I'm really excited today. I'm have Serge, um, excuse me, Serge joining me today. For those of you guys do not know, Serge and I go back. We have worked together. We're both, I'm going to call it old dog data modeling gurus. So I am very excited about today's conversation. But before we get going, maybe you can introduce yourself, Serge. Give people a little bit of background about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Keith. I'm Serge Gershkovich. I'm head of product at SQL DBM. That's how Keith and I know each other. And I'm also Snowflake superhero from several years back. I'm also an author of a text called Data Modeling with Snowflake. And data modeling is really what I am known for in my, it's one of my Snowflake superhero superpowers, I suppose. But I've my background is in data architecture, data warehousing, BI, similar to, I suppose, many people tuning in and many other superheroes.
Yeah, what I love talking with you, Serge, because I feel in the great space of data, there's not a, there's not many who I think have our passion and background for data modeling and data architecture. I know it was one of the first thing I ever learned to do in data a very, very long time ago. So I'm always excited um, about talking data modeling, and honestly, I don't get to do it very much anymore. So I'm excited about our conversation.
Yeah, it's always fun because even though, like you said, it's similar, but it's still very different because we represent two of the two paradigms in the data modeling space, which is yours, kind of a little bit more classical, old school of learn it from the get-go, evolve with it. Whereas for me, I kind of came up more from the engineering route where data modeling was just not a thing. And I had to work my way backwards, even with a computer science degree. It wasn't stressed, it wasn't emphasized. And it's only when you start working as your data model evolves, as your organization grows, and you start to bump up against some of these pain points and you realize, wait a minute, I'm doing everything right. I'm writing good SQL. Why am I getting
Why?
all these problems? And then you
Exactly.
kind of go back and educate yourself on exactly why the pain points occur.
Yeah, it is definitely become a bit of a lost art. I like you said, I speak to a lot of, I'm gonna call them younger folks in the data space, and you get a lot of people who have not even heard of data modeling. So it's from my perspective, I get, what? How have you not heard about data modeling? But to your point, I am kind of like learned like old school, but I tend to also be very open-minded, I find. So how as it was as an industry we've grown, where does data modeling fit? And having to adjust my own mindset and not just be a stubborn old person about how data modeling fits. So with that, you recently, you just published the second edition of your book. So tell me a little bit more. What evolved so much from the first edition that really said, "Hey, now's the time for me to write the second edition."
Yeah, I guess the obvious answer is Snowflake itself. So before we hit record, we were just talking about having to recertify and how each year, each 2 years, it seems like a brand new test because there's just so much
So
new
much.
functionality. And even in the data modeling space, which doesn't deal with transformations, doesn't deal with all the functions, the fancy pipelines most of the time, there are still lots of new objects to understand and work into how you architect systems like dynamic tables, like Iceberg, hybrid tables, all of these things that were, some of them weren't even on the radar when the first edition was being written. Some of them were early rumors that we might see something. And every year practically it's having to go back and play around with some of the new settings, even if you're not using them in your day to day yet. It's at least familiarize yourself with them. And the other extension to the book, of course, they're scattered throughout, but I think a large chunk of that would be working from the product side in SQL DBM and getting a chance to speak to people doing data modeling and kind of seeing where they are on their journey
Yep.
I realized that I left out a really important segment in, the book obviously is very complete on terms of explaining what data modeling is, the value, why do it, how to do it. But I realized that at the end of the day, the job itself doesn't reside solely in the data team. You're going to have conversations with your subject matter experts, your business stakeholders. And unless you really know how to engage with the business on their own terms, that might be something that as an engineer, a data architect, you might not be prepared for. In fact, you might not even get your meeting returned. So if you try to sit people down and say, "Hey, we're going to talk about semantics and relationships," they might just decline your meeting and tell you they're busy. So I thought a really good section to include would be, first of all, familiarizing of how to talk your way and how to work your initiative into and tie that into the initiatives of what your organization is already doing, whether that's expansion or focusing on cost reductions and economies and savings and budgets, and also make find collaborators, basically win friends and influence people on the business side to make them realize that what you're asking for is not a waste of time. It's going to help them in the long run. It's going to help you deliver what they want faster. It's going to help you give them better quality data. And who would say no to that if you really laid it all out like that? So that's the new last chapter of the book,
Yeah.
focuses more on how to bring all this knowledge and all this good intention back to the business and have them collaborate with you.
Yeah, it's a good point. I was I was asked, I think it was last year, by a common colleague of ours, and it was asked, hey, if there was a young, data practitioner who had a desire to become a data architect, you know, what would you give them a recommendation from a skill set? And I think, and she was a bit surprised when I said the ability to communicate with the business. And, and as you just stated, I go, one of the things when I was, leading large data warehousing teams and designing and modeling the data warehouse is exactly what you said is how do I have to be able to communicate with the C-suite people, and I have to be able to communicate with the people that are in the trenches and take that communication and build that model. And like as you said, it's a skill set that it was almost harder than learning how to be a technical data person. So that to me was a very good addition to the book, and I was happy to see that.
No, thank you. Because
Yeah.
it's like what I was saying earlier, that I personally come from a background of where even data modeling itself was not ingrained in the data culture of the company and companies that I worked in, most of them. And at first you just kind of find yourself head down trying to deliver, and then you start thinking, once you start seeing a broader perspective about continuity, scalability, maintenance, and that's when you realize, okay, this is something we need to start doing yesterday if we haven't already. But the problem again here is it's up to you. You're just, maybe you're head of the BI team, maybe something. You're not CTO, CDO. It would be great if at those levels you had somebody with a little bit more clout and authority to mandate and train up, create a culture of this is how we do things and this is why it's important. But I think more people than I would like, more people than really should be the case, find themselves in a situation similar to mine of just having to pull yourself up by the bootstrap and say, you know, we're if we just focus on delivery, we're really short-sighted in that regard. That we'll deliver tomorrow, but what about a year from now, 2 years from now? The same task is going to take twice as long. The same activity is going to generate more errors, more bugs. That it's just going to eat its way into our delivery cycle and just create bad blood between the reputation of the data team and what the company expects from us. And that's why I thought it was a really, really important thing to focus on, especially at the very end, now that you're armed with all this data modeling prowess.
So we're kind of talking about, you know, careers currently right now, and you know we have talked in the past about how modeling can advance your career at every level. I kind of want to get dive deeper into that and get your take. Like, how does modeling from the entry level to the C-suite, how can that, benefit somebody's career and the ability to advance within their career?
That's a great question. And this is something that occurred to me. Again, I speak to customers, I speak to people doing data modeling at enterprise scale. So when it's not just one source system, it's maybe hundreds of source systems, it's dozens of distributed data teams working together. And these are kind of the feedback that I get that I didn't have, I just didn't come across that in my consulting life, in my data architecture life. And once I heard kind of these heads of data, these CDOs, CTOs, and the perspective that they were laying down, some of them were legitimate veterans in the field, some of them were, young by age standards, but still very, very knowledgeable. And they were all data modeling, data modeling, data modeling. Like, you can't do the things we do at our scale without data modeling. And I thought, we've spoken a lot about that. I've written about the value of data modeling, the ROI. And then I thought, like, look at these people, because these are people working for Fortune 500 companies, like big brand names that everyone has heard of. And I thought, let me think about, how did data modeling help them scale their career, not just their enterprise, but their career. And I thought, let's break it down into like the natural life cycle of most people. You go from entry level or junior, then you work your way up to team lead, senior, then you work your way up to corporate level and maybe CDO, CTO, VP. And I started thinking, because I've seen good and great at all of those levels, and what separates good from great. And from the entry level, it's, and I can think of a use case, an example right off the top of my head of when I was interviewing someone. This was a lateral hire within the company, and there were plenty of people that knew SQL, and there were plenty of people that we interviewed that could write queries. This person was not the best at writing queries, but when we asked, can you tell me the difference between Kimball and Inman? She said, yeah, absolutely. Top down, bottom up, like kind of just natural, like, of course, like who doesn't know Kimball Inman, like what that's all about. And we realized that this is somebody that took an interest, did her homework. Again, I don't know what her background was, what led her to just understand this, but it was someone looking beyond the fundamentals of just SQL and things that everybody already knew because we had access to Snowflake, and turned out to be a great hire and made a great career for herself. And it also showed that there wasn't going to be such a steep learning curve to bringing her up to speed on the team, because she already took the time to understand. So this is something we'll come back to, but at least the semantics of what we'll be talking to her about, she already
Right.
speaks that language.
Yeah.
So automatically she stood out from the pack. You're going to say something?
No, I was just say that that's a great point because I even look back to when I started and I was doing modeling months before I even learned how to write a SQL statement, right? I was to your point, the biggest exercise was being able to see the big picture, right? And modeling is a very visual way of looking at data. And your story there was very interesting, and I can see, a little bit of my own, background in terms of the the emphasis on, when we talked about understanding the business, the visual aspect, and understanding wanting to do the big picture. Then yeah, you eventually have to understand the coding, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to. The best coders don't necessarily make you the best, person for modeling.
Yeah.
For sure.
And so now let's go one step further. Now you're a great hire. You're making your way up the data team. What makes what separate what gets you promoted to team lead or head of BI? It's the ability to deliver, first of all, consistently on time, data quality, like all these things are table stakes at this level. But if we kind of peel back the onion, what's going to drive data quality? It's consistency in your standards, consistency in your requirements, being able to communicate effectively within the team. When I say type 2 dimension, everybody around me knows what that means. They also know exactly how we structure our valid from, or is it valid to, etc. Is it from date to date? Just so there's no ambiguity, decrease as much guesswork as possible, and show people within the team, lead by example, and bring people up to your standard. Again, like this person we hired, she wasn't at that level, but she was at a team that was willing to just don't to take her with us in our journey of showing like what good looks like, instead of just saying, oh, write SQL. If it compiles. If it gets the data from point A to point B, we're good. Because you're thinking long term, like we said earlier, delivering today, but you're scaling for tomorrow and a year from now and 2 years from now. And it's very hard to say, oh, I got promoted because of data modeling. But if you connect the dots of, I got promoted because I was able to deliver on time, and I was able to deliver consistently without data anomalies. And, you just can't get there without following pretty clean. It doesn't have to be super limiting and a bunch of rules that everybody has to just review and go over. It's something that what is the minimal effective dose of consistency that gets us working as a smooth team and gives us the results we need.
Yep. No, good points. Especially, I was a big person on, like you said, best practices, standards. Even like something doesn't sound big, you talk about, type 2 dimensions. Just the value you put in the expiration date on the previous record and the value you put for the effective date on the next record. Are you doing a between? Are you doing a greater than equal to? And if you
Mhm.
have different people handling it different, then it becomes very complex for your business to use it. So something as simple as that, having that consistency in that best practice. So
Yeah.
I agree there.
And then let's go one level higher, which
Okay.
is corporate level. And at this point, it really is. First of all, you have two challenges. You are likely not having any direct authority. So, as CDO, for example, you don't lead the data team. You're just kind of in charge of educating, enforcing best practices, but also you're thinking strategically of how do I weaponize, monetize data as an asset for my entire organization. So, how do I get teams sharing data effectively? How do I make sure that we're not just doing whatever the last thing that whoever shouts the loudest, but actually tying data initiatives to the initiatives of our company, demonstrating ROI of what we're building and delivering, whether that's kind of in a monolithic way of let's focus on the data team and have them prioritize everything, or distributed data mesh, everybody. Again, with Snowflake, it's very easy, and for the first time, I would say in our history, that you can allocate budgets to teams and have them use the data warehouse for exactly what they project, to say we're going to run this project, it's going to cost this much, we expect us to deliver this much value, instead of the old school way as everybody working on one server. Basically, whoever clicks run in the morning gets the compute
Wins.
resources everybody else queues, and it's madness. And but more importantly, it's what we were saying earlier. It's learning to, at this point now, speak both the business language and the data language. It's on helping people understand, because not everybody's going to be on the same page. It's being able to translate, simplify, and explain to the business exactly what it is that you want to standardize. And for example, data contracts, things like, if everybody had their own API, if everybody had their own tool set, and everybody had their own requirements, somewhere here, somewhere, etc., it would be very chaotic. Whereas at this point, you're laying down the framework for the entire organization of here's where you can find documentation. Here's where you can build this into your code as you consume it. Here's the, here are the pipelines that you can use to get notified of upcoming changes, etc. That it's maybe easy when you have two or three teams. Maybe you don't need to have everything kind of mandated and spelled out for you. But as you grow into an organization where it's more of a publish subscribe model, you absolutely must have these standards. And you also must have somebody that keeps people accountable in terms of, you say you're going to do this and you're asking for money to do it. Let's track it. Let's make sure that you deliver on what you're asking for.
Yeah.
So all of these things, like I would simplify all these into junior level. You're just learning to listen. You're learning to understand the semantics and the terminology that are being spoken around you. At a senior level, you're learning to speak like as a team lead and say, these are the standards we're going to follow. Again, you don't need many standards. You just need to be consistent. You need to pick one. It doesn't matter which one you follow, as long as it's clear and everybody's aligned and you communicate effectively and eliminate ambiguity inside the team. And then at the organizational level, now it's not just listen and speak, it's also translate. It's making sure you take the business along for the ride, make people want to follow, because again, most of the time you're not going to have a direct authority to tell someone use this framework, use this tool, etc. You need to show people that this is just the best way to do it and it's in your best interest, and if you don't know, let me bring you up to speed.
Mm. Great points. Great points. There was a lot of great input there and good stuff. So I have my thoughts on this, but I'm really curious on yours. What's the biggest today in the era we're in? What would you say the biggest misconception people have about data modeling?
The biggest is we don't need it. I guess plain and simple, we can do without it. And I mean, I don't want to sound completely dismissive of the view, because you can make a case for when you're small enough. Maybe you're a startup, maybe you're a small company, maybe you're like three people seated around a table. Maybe at that level, sure, maybe you don't need a data model when you're just under pressure to deliver. But the process of realizing when you've crossed the threshold into the when you start to see the pain points is gradual. So you're gonna start to feel the pain long before you realize you've triaged what the symptoms are and what the root cause is. So that, I think, is number one. That it's something that, imagine, for example, I liken it to, I like to use like car and map analogies, because it's very, in the end, the data model is just a map of your data landscape. So if you didn't have a database, let's say if you didn't have Snowflake, or you didn't have a dashboard or a Tableau to present numbers on, like that would be the car. Like the business would just not get data, not get insights, and work could not continue because they don't have the information they need to make decisions. If you don't have a data model, it's the equivalent of not having a map to get to where you're going. So to be able to deliver these insights, sure, you don't need a map. You can just kind of ask along the way. You can go down an alley, realize that's not the right way to do it. You'll get where you're trying to go. You might be a little bit fashionably late or unfashionably, but I think that's where it might be a little bit, that's where the misconception comes from of we don't need it, because at the end people just show up, but they show up bruised and tattered because they got mugged in an alley where they shouldn't have been in the first place. And that
Yeah.
this is something that you learn with time. And eventually you get a map, or you get Google Maps, and you make sure that you have something that guides you into making sure you arrive where you want to go consistently and on time.
Yeah, when I was consulting and there was a few very large organizations that were using Snowflake and going in and they would have thousands of tables and you would ask them, "Do you have a data model?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, "How do you know what you have, what you don't have, how things connect together, join?" and it's just kind of like we figure it out. I'm like, oh, okay, good luck with that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
it's a
to
valid
their
point.
credit, you will figure it out, but
Yeah,
it's you start figuring it out when people start yelling at you and say, "Why
yeah,
doesn't this make any sense?" Which is,
right.
not a great way to live, but also because you arrive there gradually, you don't feel it as acutely as a slap in the face of, "Hey, get your get your ducks in a row here."
Yeah. So, I've I've interacted with many people over the years that have done books on data modeling, but you are in a unique position where not only, you know, writing a book on data modeling, but you're also the head of product at SQL DBM, for those who aren't aware, is a, modern cloud-based data modeling solution. That must give you kind of a unique perspective on what's going on in the industry, and how does that impact, what you did in the book or just day-to-day thoughts on data modeling?
That's a great question. A lot of this, I mentioned earlier that I get to see the things, kind of the nuances of why, not just how to do things, but why even some of the well-intentioned efforts oftentimes fail. And when I say that, I mean, this is again from speaking to people, not just being a developer, let's say at a company over the course of 5 years, or being a consultant on project over the course of one year or 6 months, but literally seeing dozens of people over the course of a month, and then kind of tracking them in their data modeling journey, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. And at first, when I started to see some of the people come back to us and say, actually, our data modeling initiative is floundering, it caught me off guard because I remembered these folks as not being greenhorns in the data modeling space. In fact, some of them were very, very knowledgeable veterans in data modeling itself. And I thought, well, how can they be getting it wrong? And then once I started kind of seeing more and more sample sizes, I started to connect the dots and look for patterns. And what I saw was basically that over indexing on their own experience, saying, I'm a veteran, I got this. I know I've got a direct line to Bill Inman if I fall into trouble here. We go back a long ways. And what they're not doing is I'm not going to involve the business. I'm not going to, because, oh, that's scary. I need to pick up a phone or I need to sit down next to somebody and communicate. And they're coming to me saying, hey, how can I help them understand that this is all in their best interest, and this is going to help us move faster? And have you tried talking to them? It doesn't sound like you have. And that's a unique thing that I think made its way into the book. Definitely made its way into the way I approach some of especially the early people coming to try the tool, to understand kind of what we offer. We now encourage, and we make sure that the people who need encouraging, most people kind of understand this, but we make sure that the business comes along for the ride in validating what's being built, understanding, contributing to the process, because it's going to evolve after whatever it is you're working on is delivered. That was number one. And number two was kind of the book itself came about from people asking me of, okay, I'm a project manager, or I'm a product manager, or I'm an analyst, and my data team is talking about data modeling. Can you recommend something to get me up to speed? And the more I stopped to think about it, the more I realized, honestly, no, I can't recommend something at your level, because you don't want to go down the rabbit hole. You just want to kind of understand the business value. And I think most textbooks in general, like when most people say, oh, I hate math, or I never liked math until I had this great teacher, it's because they start with the expectation that you've come there because you're hungry to know math. And that's not true. Most of the time, you realize that there's something you don't know, but you're not yet even excited about what it is that you can get out of it. And the great teachers, as I'm sure we've had, all of us, someone who really inspired us, made things interesting before they laid down all the rules and the fundamentals and the formulas. It's, hey, we're going to be able to calculate interest rates, or we're going to be able to like calculate how much money you're going to make when you start saving, or whatever it is. Or if we fire a bullet, like how long was it going to fly before it hits the ground? And then you work your way into the formulas because now you have a reason to want to know more. And that was kind of the approach I took, to start with the business case for data modeling and then work your way up. And that kind of made it into kind of just a increasing rate of complexity where you can hop off the ride at any time if it gets too scary. But you can continue kind of at your own pace and go from the why, the how, the what it looks like, and down to the very recipes and Snowflake SQL if you want to actually get hands-on and try it. And I think last point I would make on this is, because we're a modern kind of data tool that lives in the cloud, is the reason that it lives in the cloud is to make it accessible, so that for exactly what I just said. So it doesn't reside on somebody's desktop. It encourages people to log in, view the data model, comment, collaborate, contribute. We effectively put ourselves in a very different paradigm than most legacy tools. When I say legacy, I just mean anything that's desktop bound, because I feel like just being tied to a desktop already hamstrings your ability to communicate effectively across the business. Even if you get it off your desktop, it's now stale because it's been exported. And with SQL DBM, like what we're great at doing is listening to customers who are operating, let's say, in these mixed environments. For example, a data model, it doesn't look the same on a data warehouse as it does on an OLAP system, and OLTP rather. And how can we give them this mixed perspective? Or as soon as usage of, let's say, Snowflake dynamic tables starts to get off the ground, we're hearing about it, saying, hey, are you supporting dynamic tables yet? So it's a really great indicator of kind of what's really being used and what isn't in terms of Snowflake features and all the other platforms that we support. And also just keeps us honest and accountable to our users, because at the end of the day, we have to support where the trends go. And on one hand, again, it's great to have that instant feedback of where the industry is headed, what's actually being used and what's in demand. And also being able to offer a way to collaborate, a way to share objects across projects and share standards across projects that would just be really difficult in a legacy tooling scenario.
So you're just talking there about trends and where the industry going, and so I'm going to bring up the big white elephant in the room, which is AI. I know a couple years ago you and I talked about AI. Those are just the rays of heaven, Serge, that are coming through your window.
Yes. And
Um, I know you and I talked a couple years ago about AI, and we're both kind of like, yeah, we don't really know where that fits in the world of data modeling, and obviously the AI is really the dominant conversation these days. So at this point in time, how do you see it fitting into the world of data modeling?
let's look at it from both perspectives, both kind of from the inside and also inside out. So from the inside, what I mean is, how does AI aid in data modeling? And then how is data modeling aiding AI use cases, which are kind of completely two different things that I'd like to separate. The first one I think is a little easier, of AI, what role does it play inside data modeling? So we used to have to do data modeling. Now AI just does everything for us. It's a non-issue. No. Um,
Reads my mind.
no. Again, a data model is just a blueprint of your business model. So AI, when it comes to your organization, it can scan every document you have. It's still not an efficient way, or even probably a very good way, to architect what it is you're trying to do. It's just way too complex and it's way too nuanced. So AI cannot do data modeling for you, but it can accelerate data modeling, because there's a lot of repetitive tasks that are not hard. They just require a lot of cognitive load. Just take a requirement for a given, just one table out of the hundreds that might be in your schema. When you speak to the users, you're noting down, okay, these are the names, these are the data types, make sure this has such and such constraints, make sure this is such and such length. This thing is a reference to a primary key in another table. And it's not rocket science, but imagine if you can take all of that, run it through an AI, get DDL, and work that right into your model. Or things like writing descriptions. Everyone hates it because the descriptions tend to be very similar to the name of the column itself. And then you're just kind of finding creative ways to say, what is a date? What is a customer? AI is great at taking a first pass at that. Again, will it know the definition of what an active customer is or when your fiscal year starts? Probably not, but it's just changing one word versus having to go down the list and do everything. So in SQL DBM, we just announced our Copilot features, which has all of these things that I'm describing, or even being able to take an image as an input and generate a data model. Just take requirements or speak to your model in natural language. Imagine it as a consumer coming in. You might just be browsing a data set to say, how can I use this? Or how can I take certain things and work that into my model? And you can just ask, is there information about packaging? Is there information about bin numbers? Whatever it is, where is it? How do I join to it? So to there, it's just a huge accelerator. But these are things that I think we're familiar with in any domain. You can delegate certain things to AI, and there are things that you cannot, or at least you'd have to double check them pretty carefully. The more interesting one is how are you going to use AI with the data set that you have, because that's where costs really are a factor. In this case, I think people are, when we look back to what happened in the big data debacle of schema on read, it took a long time for people to realize that that was not the smart thing to do.
Right.
Now with AI, there was the initial hype of, yeah, just throw AI at it, AI will figure it out. AI is nothing more than a pattern recognition tool at hyperscale, but that's all it really is. So you can ask it, for example, what are sales by customer for such and such month or whatever. And if you have a table with a customer column, it's pretty good at going and grouping and aggregating. But what if it's called client? Or what if client
Right.
is now account in a certain context? Is it going to guess? And again, with every guess, there's the margin of it being wrong just
Wrong.
goes up and up and up. So in people are starting, they're bumping up against that as soon as they make the first natural language query. And the great thing is there is a way to get AIs to understand your data. It's called a semantic model. And even better news is that a semantic model is pretty much your data model. It's your physical model with a few kind of nuances like filters and synonyms that you don't have in a physical model, that if you've been doing your due diligence and doing data modeling right, it costs you virtually nothing to convert your data model into a semantic model. And now AI has something intelligible and can give you back meaningful results. But here, I think there's also a distinction of what a data model and a semantic model are not, and what's the differentiator between those two. And a data model is singular because it describes the structure of your data. A semantic model, the word semantic means meaning, describes the meaning of the information contained in that physical model. And the meaning is subjective. There could be many meanings. So when I
Right.
say customer or region, you can have a sales region, you can have a marketing region, you can have a shipping region. Those are all different meanings within your organizations, and maybe they all sit in the same region table. They're just different groupings.
Right.
And a lot of times they won't even be in the data set. Like when someone says North America, there may not be a North America value in the region column. It could be a grouping of US and Canada, for example. And you just have to know that as part of your business vernacular. And this is what semantic models are great at capturing. So that's why they have these synonyms, they have the groupings, they have these named filters of when someone says North America in this context, grouped by values X and Y. But I think it's great. I mean, semantic models have been around forever, except now it's a household name. Why? Because you can't use LLMs without them. You
Okay.
can't do any of the fancy stuff without having any kind of mechanism to translate between natural language and business concepts. Because here it's not technology. It's like we said earlier. AI, it's great at finding patterns, it's great at decoding, but it just doesn't know your business as well as you know your business. So it's just finding a way to lay that down in a common way that you can, in this case, YAML, to take it and say, here you go. All the information you need is here, or even here's multiple interpretations. If somebody from the sales team asks you about North America, use this version. If someone from marketing, use this version. And it just reduces that ambiguity. Like ambiguity, again, it keeps coming up. Semantics actually did, out of curiosity, since I started thinking about semantic models, I went and I took the first edition of my book that was written 2 or 3 years ago now, but basically before Cortex, before Snowflake intelligence. So there were no semantic views to speak of. And I just did a search for the word semantic and it came up over 30 times.
Um,
Yeah, which, I wasn't surprised I remembered, but it just occurred to me that the nuance between data model and semantic model is very small. It's structure versus meaning. And a lot of times they're almost interchangeable. But again, as we're talking about scale, it's very unlikely that you have one semantic interpretation of certain concepts in a large organization. And even if you do, the physical model is just not built to contain all of the nuances, that anything that's not present in the data is not present in the model, period. You have conceptual modeling, you have logical modeling, but even those don't all capture a lot of times some of the nuances that are captured by a semantic model.
it's interesting you bring up the semantic model and the importance now with the LLMs. And I was just having a conversation with a group of developers just last week, and I used it as a way to say, see why it's important to do a good physical model, because they were doing such a complex semantic model to overcome the lack of any proper structure at the physical level, right? So their semantic model was being
But
extremely, and I
how
says, yeah,
did they even approach it without having a physical model?
it was, yeah, very complex in terms of like, well, this table is not really called customer, it's called, and it was, they were having a hard time. I don't even know if they had success defining a semantic model because of how complex and disorganized the physical structures were in the back. That, oh, I as a human can write a query against this, but how am I going to make it so that an AI, like you said, natural language perspective, could hear the question a business person was speaking and asking it in and interpreting it into that. And so it started to really emphasize the importance of having a good physical design if you really want to have a good semantic model that goes over the top of it.
Yeah, like you said, it's something that you build on top of. If you have a good physical framework, then semantic almost comes naturally. But semantics are like a bridge, a translation between something that systems understand. Like now, AIs are just really good at consuming them, but third-party downstream systems, dashboards, Power BI, Tableau, all of these things can consume a semantic model to produce better queries. So it's nothing revolutionary, but we also have to think about the format. So most of these are written in YAML or something that could be codified and read by a system, not by a person, even if it's the person kind of helping craft it. But the information is the same. So isn't it easier to use a diagramming tool to construct your physical model and then dump that out into YAML, add a few nuances, and to overstate the obvious of, if you're doing the exercise of building the physical model, it's unlikely that you're going to have all these renamings and synonyms and multiple versions of the same thing. It's going to be cleaner to begin with.
Yeah.
And it's just a self-reinforcing thing, that everything that we've been saying earlier, that the more effort you put into building things that are coherent, standardized, things that scale easily because of all those rules that you've been following, the easier then these things are going to come as you're having to extend into the semantic layer, because business is going to ask for that. There's, Snowflake and other data platforms are making it easier and easier every day to just log in and not have to learn any SQL and just ask for insights. And who's going to get blamed? As usual, the data team is the front line between the results, whether they're in a dashboard and the data coming in. And
Yeah.
yeah, they need to own up. They need to own this. And this one is something that before maybe there was a little bit more of gating going on, of, we give you the dashboard, you look at the dashboard, and maybe we can kind of clean up things along the way, rename them at the very last presentation layer. But this democratizes access to the
Yeah.
information, and it strips away the data team of anything they might have been able to sweep under the rug earlier. And it just exposes that of, do you have a clean data model? Like, can the world's most advanced invention to date can't even make sense of your shitty mess of a schema that you made? Is that really your excuse? Go ahead
Yeah.
and talk your way out of this one.
Yeah. Good luck with that one. Yeah, absolutely. That's good stuff. So I kind of want to switch it up a little bit. We're running out of time, but I do really want to go through this with you because, you said when you were doing the book, things in Snowflake, a lot of new things that evolved in Snowflake, and I kind of want to do a lightning round with you on some of these things. Kind of get your, is it overrated, underrated? One sentence, just take on that concept. Dynamic tables.
Dynamic tables are, I think, underrated because they're still early. So a lot of things that have already been built have not been transitioned. I think if teams were starting a data warehouse or a build out or a migration from scratch, they would rely much more heavily on dynamic tables because they give you the pipelines right out of the box. So you don't need to rely even on a third-party tool like DBT, which again, if you've purchased and you're happy and you've got a lot of investment in what you've done and the work you've done there, then sure. But if you're starting from scratch, I think DBT with dynamic tables would be almost the norm, the go-to for running pipelines within Snowflake. So give it time.
The next one is an interesting one because, especially with I guess the acquisition of a Postgres looking to go into Snowflake, hybrid tables.
Hybrid tables, I think, honestly, I hate to admit it, but I think overrated. I've when they first came onto the scene, it sounded like a game changer, that you
Yeah,
can have transactional and operational and analytics workloads all in one object seamlessly, real time, performant. And unfortunately, the use cases have been, I would say, mixed at best. So what we can kind of say is they are very expensive, at least compared objectively speaking to traditional tables.
yeah,
They do certain have architectural limitations in terms of cloning and things like that. And I would say it's a 50-50 toss up between kind of some of the teams that I've asked and the success they've seen with them. We're going to see where this goes. So I think the acquisition of Crunchy Data is maybe in line with that of Snowflake realizing that maybe they need to build something a little bit more organic in this space.
yeah. I would agree there. Um, One another type of table that has kind of been, I guess, the rave of late, which is iceberg tables.
Iceberg. Um, I think it's adequately rated
Okay.
because it's something that you're not going to jump into unless you really have a need for it. So it this is something that does live up to the hype, that it performs pretty much in line with native standard table. However, use it if and when you need it. If you have a multi-platform environment, if you have kind of mixed architecture, mixed platform, mixed team that can consume something with workload maybe that doesn't run on Snowflake, machine learning, something like this would make data sharing easier. But I think in this case, most people that go down that route have already done their homework. And the good news is that they will get the performance that they expect out of these objects. So I would say properly rated.
Okay, that's a good one. That's good. We gotta have you can't everything can't be over or under, right? So that's a good call there. This last one we kind of just briefly talked about it a little bit, but again, I really want to bring it back, which is semantic views.
Semantic views, I think at this point, underrated because implicit in that is everything that we discussed earlier is doing the due diligence on the data modeling side to even make semantic views feasible for your team. And a lot of times, you know how if you've ever had to like organize your garage or something, just by doing the work, you find a lot of cool things that you had lost track of. You find a lot of useless things that you maybe need to clear out to make some space. And I think the exercise of semantic modeling is really a reckoning for teams to, if you haven't done it, to really come to terms with exactly all of the duplicates that we might have had, all of the clutter that we have along the way, all of the things that maybe we need to move out and make space for. So even if even if people haven't transitioned to them in a practical use case of speaking to them with Cortex or connecting them to other downstream third-party tools, I think just the exercise itself would be very cathartic in terms of cleaning up your overall architecture. So I would say very much underrated in that regard.
So we're coming to an end here, but I have one more question for you. What would from your voice, what would you hope readers take away from this second edition?
From the second edition, I would hope that again it's an enhanced first edition, so everything that was relevant there. Again, because it's data modeling, it's been around since literally the late 60s, early 70s. Not much has changed. It's only getting more and more nuanced. When I wrote the second edition, I didn't have to revise and take out old stuff because it no longer applied. The primary key is still a primary key and it's still important, but also the business value that we talked about. So it's all the new Snowflake objects that the book now covers, and it's a perspective that you really can't get anywhere else. And there's been plenty of people that have recommended this book outside of the Snowflake context just because of the the business understanding and the importance and the ROI of modeling as a practice. If you're not specifically concerned about the Snowflake part, you can still take away those lessons. And that's now more than ever with semantic models, with people kind of bumping into the data quality and the naming and the inconsistencies in their data is more relevant than it ever was.
Yeah, good. Well, Serge, as always, it's been exciting to talk shop. Two old data modeling dogs talking about some data modeling.
Yeah, I've
Um,
missed this. Thank you so much for having me, Keith.
yeah, no, this was great for everybody. Again, that's data modeling with Snowflake. It's his second edition. The link to purchase I will be in the comments below, so be sure to grab a copy, get up to date, and again, thanks
Yeah.
everybody
And
for.
the
Go ahead.
information in that book is guaranteed to be spot on and meticulous because it was spot checked by the man himself, Keith
Oh,
Belanger, credited as a reviewer. So you know you're getting quality information there.
well, I do appreciate, you asking me. It was humbling to have a chance to read it ahead of time and give my 2 cents. So that was fantastic. So yeah, definitely everybody go out and get your copy of the book. And become a modeling expert. Be an advocate for modeling. There's not enough out there, so please do so. But again, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you on our next episode of Behind the Cape. Bye,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thank you so much. Take care.